Alaska, a river full of salmon, 3 hunters, and 1 bear so massive, locals called him the River King. But what they thought would be a routine hunt quickly became a nightmare. Every move, every breath, every second could be their last. The morning light over Alaska's Salmon Ridge always arrives slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated before touching this wild place. It wasn't the warm golden sunrise seen in calendars or travel videos. Here, the daylight came thin and silvery, slicing across the treetops like cold steel. It gave the forest an eerie, shifting glow, the kind that makes every shadow look alive, every fallen branch resemble something watching. That morning, 3 hunters drifted their aluminum boat through the shallows of the Kudu River. The water was so clear and still, it looked like glass stretched thin across the earth. Each paddle stroke echoed off the canyon walls, far louder than it should have. Even the usual chatter of birds seemed muted, like the valley itself was holding its breath. Ronan, positioned at the bow, scanned the banks with the unwavering focus of someone who'd spent half his life tracking predators. Sylvia, crouched low behind him with her camera, moved with the calm precision of a scientist. Marek, the guide, steered from the back, his face expressionless but his knuckles white against the oar. None of them were new to this wilderness. They'd hunted, photographed, and guided in Alaska's backcountry for years. But today was different. They weren't after a normal bear. They were tracking the one locals called the River King, a massive male grizzly that had been the subject of rumors for years. People spoke of him in lowered voices, like the creature wasn't just an animal but something carved out of the mountains themselves. Stories varied. Some said he was the heaviest bear anyone had ever seen in the region. Others swore he could tear an entire salmon rack down with a single swipe. There were even murmurs from old trappers, claiming they'd seen him standing upright, towering over the landscape in a way no normal bear should. Whatever the truth was, the trio knew the numbers didn't lie. Tracks nearly twice the width of Ronan's hand. Claw marks shoulder high on spruce trees, bones scattered along river bends like discarded twigs. Everything suggested a bear of record-breaking size. And bears that reach that size do not behave like normal grizzlies. The river drifted on quietly, too quietly. Not a splash, not a ripple, nothing but the sound of their boats skimming the surface. Sylvia lowered her camera for a moment. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "The river's never been this silent." Marek nodded, eyes narrowing. "When the river goes quiet," he muttered, "it means something big is close." Ronan didn't answer. He kept staring forward, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Something had been bothering him since they launched the boat, something he couldn't quite articulate. The air felt heavy, thick with the kind of tension you sense in your spine before you ever see the danger. Then it happened. A flicker of movement to the left, just a blur at first, but powerful enough to ripple the tall grass along the bank. Ronan froze. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He simply lifted one finger, enough to make the others go still instantly. The boat drifted another 4 feet before settling against a submerged rock. The silence grew thicker. Even the wind seemed to vanish. Then the shape stepped out. Not lumbering, not wandering, not curious, purposeful, deliberate. A massive grizzly, easily the largest any of them had ever seen, emerged from behind a cluster of alders. Steam rose from its thick fur as the cold morning light struck it from behind, turning it into a moving shadow edged with silver. Shoulders like stacked boulders shifted under its coat. Water dripped from its chin. Each step it took looked impossibly heavy, the ground vibrating slightly under its weight. Sylvia inhaled sharply. That can't be real. But it was real, and it was staring directly at them. Its eyes weren't the dull, wandering eyes of most bears. These were sharp, calculating, locked in on one specific thing. The metallic glint of their aluminum boat, a reflection. A flash of movement, something small but enough to catch the attention of a predator with instincts honed over decades. The River King didn't look hungry. He didn't look startled. He looked interested, and that was far more dangerous. "This isn't normal behavior," Ronan whispered. "Something's not right." The bear lifted its head, sniffed the air, and took another step toward the water's edge. Its breath came out in slow clouds. Muscles shifted under its coat like cables pulling tight before a strike. Marek swallowed hard. "One wrong move," he murmured, "and it's over." The river remained silent. The air refused to move. The forest felt like it was leaning in closer, and the River King kept coming. Most grizzlies bluff charge. Most grizzlies give you warnings. The huffing, the popping jaws, the stiff-legged approach meant to test your nerve. But this one didn't. This bear, the River King, behaved like a predator in full commit mode. No hesitation. No posturing. No curiosity. Just raw acceleration. It launched from the riverbank with so much force that the entire shoreline seemed to shatter behind it. One moment the hunters were drifting in silence, the next the water erupted like a depth charge detonating beneath the surface. Ronan swore later that he didn't even see the bear's legs move, just a blur of wet fur and muscle barreling toward them like a living avalanche. And then it hit. Not a swipe, not a warning, a full-body collision, the kind grizzlies use when they're taking down moose calves or smashing into a rival. The impact shook the entire valley. The aluminum hull screamed as four claws tore through it, like paper. The front of the drift boat bent inward, cracking so violently that both oars snapped from their locks. The world kicked sideways, a single brutal jolt that sent Sylvia smashing against the seat. Her scream cut through the roar of the river. A single swing from the Grizzly opened her leg from knee to thigh. A clean, catastrophic tear. Blood sprayed across the water in a thin, pink mist. She didn't even feel the pain at first. Just a burning numbness, followed by the sickening warmth spreading through her pants. On the opposite side of the boat, Marek barely had time to turn before the bear's second strike raked across his shoulder. The claws didn't just cut, they removed. Fabric, skin, and muscle peeled back in one horrifying motion. He staggered, dropped his paddle, and nearly toppled into the water, then and there. And in that split second, Ronan raised his rifle. A move every hunter trains for. A move that should have saved them. But the bear, impossibly, was already there. Its second hit landed before Ronan could even chamber a round. Boom! The boat didn't just rock, it folded. The force snapped the rear support beam and lifted the entire right side out of the water. Ronan's rifle was wrenched from his hands, as though torn away by a mechanical arm. Metal shrieked as the hull twisted, bent, and then rolled. The river swallowed them. No dramatic sinking. No slow descent. The boat flipped instantly. The world became a tornado of icy darkness. One moment the sky was overhead. The next, they were trapped underneath an overturned boat, slamming against them as the river dragged them downstream. The shock of the water was a violence all its own. The kind that shuts down your lungs, your thoughts, your sense of direction. At that temperature, your body starts dying in under 3 minutes. Sylvia didn't know which way was up. Marek couldn't move his injured arm. Ronan felt the current rip his boots halfway off. Every survival instinct they had was drowning under the weight of the freezing water. Their rifles vanished instantly, swallowed by the dark current, gone before any of them could even reach for them. All three were reduced to bare, panicked survival against a predator still somewhere in the chaos above them. They surfaced separately. Ronan broke through first, gasping so hard it felt like his throat was tearing open. The overturned boat churned behind him, slamming into rocks as the river pulled everything downstream. Then Sylvia surfaced, or tried to. Her wounded leg was barely functioning, and her hands clawed at the surface as the current spun her in tight, helpless circles. The water around her glowed faintly red, and Marek didn't surface at all. For 5 agonizing seconds, Ronan scanned the water in pure animal panic. The bear could still be on them, charging into the river, diving after them, following the scent of blood. Grizzlies don't normally hunt humans underwater. But then again, the River King wasn't following any rule Ronan had ever learned. Finally, Marek erupted from the current 10 yards downstream, coughing violently, one hand reaching for anything to grab, as the river dragged him toward deeper water. His eyes were wide with shock, the kind of stare people get right before hypothermia takes over. But the river wasn't finished with them yet. A hidden drop-off waited ahead. A sudden plunge where the gentle-looking current turned into a dangerous channel. The water accelerated, pulling them faster and faster, slamming their bodies against rocks hidden beneath the surface. Each impact knocked air from their lungs, sent stars bursting across their vision, made their frozen muscles seize up. Behind them, something enormous moved in the water. A wake, a surge, a shape too big to be anything but the bear. It wasn't giving up. It wasn't walking away. It wasn't finished. The River King was still coming. And Ronan realized something horrifying as the current dragged them around a bend in the river. They hadn't escaped the bear. They had only given it a better angle. The river was delivering them straight into its territory, a narrow gorge where the bear hunted, patrolled, and dominated everything that moved. And now, 3 bleeding, freezing, unarmed humans were drifting straight into the heart of it. The water was glacial, not cold, not freezing, but the kind of cold that steals muscle strength in under 60 seconds. A temperature that turns blood sluggish. A temperature that kills without ever needing fangs or claws. The moment the river swallowed them, their bodies began shutting down, inch by inch. Sylvia felt the pain in her leg only for a moment. After that, it went numb. A dangerous numbness, the kind that makes people think they're fine right before they slip beneath the surface forever. A ribbon of crimson trailed behind her in the fast-moving current, a drifting beacon screaming to every predator in the valley. Ronan's left arm hung useless against his side. He wasn't sure whether it was dislocated or shattered. All he knew was that it wouldn't respond, not even when he tried to curl his fingers. Every time the current spun him, the dead weight of it dragged him under for half a second longer than he could afford. Marek was shouting something. Instructions, warnings, maybe prayers. But the river swallowed his voice every few seconds. All that cut through the chaos were fragments. Keep moving. Don't stop. It's still coming. And then came the sound that froze all 3 of them more than the water ever could. The bear dropped into the river. Grizzlies are powerful swimmers. They don't paddle like dogs or thrash like humans. They move, controlled and terrifyingly efficient. The River King hit the water with a deep, chesty splash and immediately began cutting through the current like a living torpedo. Its soaked fur clung to its frame, revealing the slabs of muscle beneath. Its growls vibrated through the canyon walls, low, resonant rumbles that felt more like earthquakes than sound. Every few seconds, its jaws snapped above the surface, teeth flashing in the gray daylight. It wasn't trying to intimidate them anymore. It was hunting. Sylvia screamed when she saw the bear closing the distance, its massive head pushing through the white water, eyes locked on her bleeding leg. Ronan acted without thinking. With one functioning arm, he shoved the half-floating cooler between them, the same cooler that had held their lunches not 10 minutes ago. Now it was the only thing stopping the largest grizzly any of them had ever seen. The cooler hit the bear square in the snout. It didn't hurt it. It didn't even slow it, but it gave them one more second. And in a situation like this, a second was worth more than any weapon they had just lost. The river tossed them like children's toys. One moment they were sucked toward the left bank. The next they were spinning toward sharp rocks, hidden just beneath the surface. The canyon walls were narrowing as the current funneled into a long chute, a natural slide that accelerated everything inside it, including the bear. "This isn't good," Marek yelled, though no one needed him to say it. The current became their enemy. It was too strong to fight, too unpredictable to control, and too fast to see what was waiting downstream. It twisted them, slammed them forward, pulled their legs out from under them even while they were floating. Ronan felt himself drag backward, his boots catching on a submerged boulder that almost flipped him face first into the torrent. Behind them, the River King surged forward. The grizzly's sheer size should have slowed it, but instead the current worked with it. Every push of its hind legs sent it gliding several feet closer. Its breaths came out in rapid snorts, its jaws clacking shut inches behind the broken log. Ronan had wedged between Sylvia and the bear. The log spun violently. The bear lunged. Its teeth grazed Sylvia's boot. Ronan kicked backward, shoving Sylvia away from the snapping jaws. The effort almost cost him his balance. The river yanked him under for a terrifying second, filling his mouth and nose with freezing water. When he surfaced again, sputtering and half-blind, Sylvia was farther downstream, clinging desperately to the cooler. Marek wasn't much farther behind her, his injured arm turning purple, each stroke of his good arm weaker than the last. Ronan knew the truth he hadn't said out loud. The cold would kill them before the bear did, but the bear would make sure they never lasted that long. The river narrowed even more. The noise intensified, the deep roar of an unseen drop or rapid ahead. The current surged faster. Their bodies accelerated whether they wanted to or not, and the bear came with them. The grizzly wasn't giving up, even as waves crashed over its head. Even as it fought the full force of the canyon current, it drove forward with terrifying determination. Its head would disappear beneath the surface, reappear seconds later, eyes locked on the blood trailing behind Sylvia. The canyon walls pressed closer, and Ronan realized something worse. The river was about to force them into a bottleneck, a place where water shot through in a violent squeeze, too narrow for them to move freely, but wide enough for a bear. "Sylvia," Ronan shouted, "stay ahead of it, don't stop," as if she had a choice. Her lips were blue. Her hands barely clung to the cooler. Her injured leg dragged behind her like dead weight. Every time the current spun her, she had to fight the instinct to just let go and float face down. Mark tried to swim toward her, but the current ripped him in the opposite direction, slamming him against the canyon wall. He cried out in pain as his wounded shoulder hit the rock hard enough to crack. The river claimed them again, sucking all three toward the bottleneck, the sound of the choking channel growing louder with every second. And over the roar of water, one sound cut through: the bear's growl. It wasn't far. It wasn't slowing. It was inches behind them and gaining. The river might have been their enemy, but at that moment it was also the only thing keeping them ahead of the predator tearing through the water behind them. And the canyon was about to make that impossible. For several long, torturous seconds, the water behind them was a war zone: thrashing waves, exploding spray, and the unmistakable sound of a 1,000-pound grizzly tearing through the river with murderous intent. Every lunge was a shockwave. Every swipe sent curtains of water flying, and every roar seemed to vibrate through their ribs. They weren't swimming anymore. They were being chased inside a liquid tunnel, a place where sound echoed, tangled, and stretched into nightmarish shapes. Ronan couldn't even tell where the bear was. He only knew the current behind them kept erupting, the surface breaking violently as the River Kings surged closer. Then something changed. A shift, a pressure, a subtle drop in the roar of the water. The riverbed fell away. The current deepened, dragging them forward with sudden speed, almost like a giant invisible hand pulling them into a new section of the valley. The walls widened. The water darkened. The sound of crashing waves softened into long, low churns. The river was no longer a violent maze. It was a channel, a deep one, and that depth slowed the bear. For the first time since launching from the bank, the grizzly hesitated. It stopped mid-swim, rising high in the water with its massive front paws paddling in slow, confused circles. The blood in the water still drew its attention, but something else suddenly overpowered that instinct. Silver flashes, a swirl of scales, a school of salmon fighting upstream along the right bank. For a brief, unbelievable moment, the bear's head turned away from the three humans it had been relentlessly pursuing. It inhaled sharply, a deep, chest-hollowing breath that all predators take right before shifting attention. Then it hesitated. Just for a second, just long enough for instinct to override momentum. The salmon broke the water again, scattering like coins tossed across the surface. The River King's ears twitched. Its head snapped toward the commotion. And in that tiny, fragile space of hesitation, their lives were spared. Sylvia was barely conscious. Her eyes fluttered in and out, and her lips were blue. Ronan saw her slipping and kicked desperately toward the bank with only one usable arm. Every stroke felt like pushing through molten iron. Merrick reached the mud first. He didn't crawl out. He dragged himself out. His boots carved deep trenches behind him. As he clawed at the bank with his good hand, his injured shoulder leaving a streak of red against the wet earth. When he collapsed onto solid ground, his breath came in short, jagged bursts that sounded more like sobs than gasps. Ronan hit the shallows soon after, half carrying, half shoving Sylvia toward the edge. She was so cold her body was stiffening, her legs barely responding as he pulled her across the last swirling stretch of river. Her fingernails scraped the mud as she finally reached the bank, her entire body convulsing with violent shivers. The three of them lay there soaked, bleeding, freezing, staring at the sky as if they'd forgotten the world existed. Behind them, the River King roared one final time, a long, frustrated bellows that echoed through the entire valley, bouncing off the stone walls and rolling downriver like thunder. The sound didn't come from hunger or injury. It came from denial. Something it wanted had slipped away. When Ronan rolled over onto his stomach, fighting down a wave of nausea from the pain in his arm, he saw the bear lumbering toward the bank a few dozen yards away. For one terrifying second, he thought it might come after them again, that it would climb the mud, close the distance, finish what it started. But the bear wasn't looking at them. It was looking past them, downstream, back to the salmon run. The valley held its breath as the bear finally made its choice. With a grunt, the River King splashed toward the shoreline, shook its massive body sending a spray of icy droplets across the river like glittering needles, and lumbered away into the willows. Its heavy footfalls faded until all that remained was the quiet hiss of the current and the soft rustling of branches. Only then did Ronan dare to breathe again. Their rifles were gone. Their gear was gone. Their boat was likely shattered somewhere miles downstream. And the lethal, creeping cold, was sinking deeper into their bones, sinking teeth sharper than any predator. But they were out, alive. Barely. For now, Marek whispered, his voice thin and ghost-like. Sylvia didn't respond. She was shaking uncontrollably, her breath coming in short, rapid bursts. Ronan immediately tore off his jacket and pressed it against her leg, trying to slow the bleeding and block the wind. Her skin felt like stone beneath his fingers. "We have to move," he said, though he wasn't sure his voice was real. "If we stay here, hypothermia will finish us." Marek pushed himself upright with a groan, every inch of his body protesting. "Move where?" he rasped. "We lost everything." Ronan scanned the valley. The river curved sharply ahead, disappearing behind a line of towering spruce. Mist hung low over the water. The sun was already sinking behind the ridgeline, turning the sky into a cold sheet of steel. Somewhere out there, the river would lead them to a clearing, a cabin, a road, something. It had to, because the valley might have let them escape the bear, but it wasn't done testing them. Not by a long shot. They couldn't stay by the river. Not with the bear somewhere behind them, maybe feeding, maybe circling, maybe watching from the trees. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind along the stones, felt like a warning. None of them said it out loud, but they all understood the same brutal truth. The River King wasn't done until they were out of his valley. So they walked, or tried to. It wasn't walking as much as it was stumbling forward on frozen legs, leaning on each other when one collapsed, forcing themselves upright again because the alternative was lying down and letting the cold finish them. The river had nearly taken their lives, but the forest, deep, endless, indifferent, was ready to take whatever the river had missed. Miles passed under their feet, slowly, painfully, bleeding from wounds they couldn't treat, breathing air that felt like knives. Sylvia's pants were stiff with dried blood. Every step reopened the gash along her thigh. Marek's shoulder oozed steadily, the torn skin exposed to the freezing air. Ronan couldn't feel his fingers anymore. His left arm dangled like a rope, useless and swelling. The forest pressed in on all sides, silent except for the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the frost-hardened earth. The trees towered above them like unforgiving sentinels, branches drooping low under the weight of early winter. Every few minutes a clump of snow slid off a spruce and landed with a dull, muffled thud that sent Sylvia's nerves spiking each time. She kept glancing behind them, expecting to see the massive shadow pushing through the riverbank, but nothing followed. Only the forest, cold, empty, uncaring. Hours blurred into a single, punishing march. Their breaths came out as fog, each exhale trembling as they fought to stay conscious. Hypothermia didn't hit all at once. It seeped in slowly, whispering to them that lying down would be easier, that closing their eyes would be peaceful. Ronan recognized the signs in Sylvia first. Her pace slowed, her head dipped, her steps drifted off the faint trail weaving toward the trees. "Sylvia," he snapped, grabbing her arm. She blinked slowly, as though waking from a dream. "I'm fine," she whispered, slurring the last word. She wasn't fine, none of them were, but the forest didn't care. It didn't care about wounded legs, torn shoulders, or shattered arms. It didn't care about the bear that had tried to end them. It didn't care that night was falling and snow was beginning to drift sideways through the air, carried by a wind sharp enough to peel skin from bone. It only cared about what survived long enough to see morning and what didn't. By the time they reached the edge of the valley, the sky had darkened into a deep, bruised purple. Clouds rolled in like smoke from a distant fire, swallowing the last bit of daylight. The wind intensified, cutting through their wet clothes and chilling them to the marrow. "Cabin," Marek rasped, pointing ahead. Ronan squinted through the swirling snow. There, shadowed against the tri-line, stood a shape. A small wooden structure, crooked chimney, shuttered windows. A hunter's or trapper's cabin, half buried in early winter. Relief hit them like a drug. Not joy, not safety, just the raw instinct of humans recognizing shelter before their bodies gave out completely. They pushed forward with the last scraps of strength they had. Ronan nearly fell headfirst up the porch steps. Marek shoulder-checked the frozen door until the old latch cracked open. Sylvia stumbled over the threshold and collapsed to her knees. Inside, the air was only marginally warmer than outside. But it was enough. They didn't speak. They didn't think. They simply collapsed onto the wooden floor, shaking violently as their bodies realized the fight was temporarily over. Ronan crawled toward the fireplace, fingers numb and clumsy. There were old logs stacked beside it, dry, split, and ready, a blessing they didn't dare question. He struck a match with trembling hands. It took 5 attempts before the flame caught, flickering weakly before devouring the kindling. A small fire fought to warm the room. The flames cast their shadows against the rough cabin walls, stretching and shrinking with every flicker. Steam rose from their soaked clothes, curling upward like ghostly fingers. The smell of wet wool, blood, and river mud filled the room. Sylvia's teeth chattered uncontrollably. Marek leaned against the wall, head tipped back, breathing through clenched teeth as pain from his shoulder finally swept in all at once. Ronan sat closest to the fire, staring at his useless arm, the skin purple and swollen. They survived the night, but none of them slept. Every time the wind howled outside, they flinched. Every snapping branch sounded like a bear's footstep. Every shifting shadow reminded them that the River King had disappeared into the willows. Not retreated, just paused. They knew what they had escaped. They knew what still lived in that valley. And they knew the forest wasn't done with them. Not yet. The fire crackled softly. Sylvia whispered the words they were all thinking. It could still be out there. Ronan stared into the flames, jaw tight. It is, he said. Outside, the storm thickened. Snow smothered the roof. Wind clawed at the shutters. The valley held its breath once more, waiting, watching. Because in this part of Alaska, the forest doesn't protect anyone. It just decides who makes it out. If you want more jaw-dropping true stories where nature flips the script, hit subscribe to Winds of Thought. We release new chilling wildlife encounters every week. Don't miss a single one.